So I want to talk about this concept. This concept is the difference between playing Magic to win or playing Magic not to lose. This is sort of the two baseline strategies that first emerged like at the beginning of competitive Magic. There's two schools of thought. One was I'm going to remove all inefficiency and inconsistency in my deck, which took the form of Sly. And this eventually becomes red deck wins. That's the archetype as we know it today. And the other side of the coin is playing the game not to lose, which is the strategy called the deck, which was developed by Brian Weissman. And the idea with the deck was I'm going to play as many cards as possible to stop my opponent from winning the game, and then I will play as few cards as possible to actually win the game. So I wanted to discuss how Commander systems put different pressures, different forces on these lines of strategic thinking.
Distraction makers.
Before we get too far into this, I want to preface this with, this is a particular philosophy on Magic, right? This is one that has come from just our analysis of Commander systems. We're not saying that this is the only philosophy that's possible, or even if this will come to be the best thing to happen in Commander. It's us looking at Commander from a systems perspective. It's not looking at the minutia of mechanics that could subvert the systems.
So I guess we could look at like Brian Weissman's The Deck, right? The original control deck, and look at a deck that plays a lot of interaction. And we've gotten some flack in the past talking about how interaction technically is bad.
In Commander.
In Commander, yes. And it's bad because it's generally card disadvantage, right? If I'm using a spell to stop your spell, two other players didn't use anything. And so you and that other player that you countered are now at a disadvantage in comparison to the two players that did not have to enter into that.
Right. You're -1, the opponent who you countered is -1, and the other two players are 0. And oftentimes that dynamic is even different outside of that because maybe there's something like a Rhystic Study in play. You're playing spells that draw other players' cards. Rhystic Study in particular changes this dynamic even more.
Right. If one of those players had a Rhystic Study, then they're like, please counterspell.
Right. Yeah. Let me draw cards.
Yeah.
And you're also sort of in that moment incentivized to do so because maybe they draw something that also counters, and then we end up in these sort of stalemates that we've seen emerge.
And this is counter to the original The Deck or control decks, right? Where in a 1v1 format, right, those two decks, Sly and the deck going against each other, makes perfect sense, right? They're at opposite ends where someone's trying to win fast and someone's trying to prevent that person from winning, essentially, so that they can win eventually. But here we're seeing that actually in a 4-player or a multiplayer environment, it's not good for you to go and actually play interaction to go and move towards that win condition. This sort of naturally ends up pushing players towards that rush strategy.
Right. And also in Commander systems, rush strategies don't exist in the same way that they do in 60 card, where 60 card we have something like Red Deck Wins, where we're focused on playing really efficient things that lower our opponent's life total as quickly as possible. But life totals are twice the size and you have 3 opponents in Commander. So the way that a rush strategy exists in Commander is through what players call turbo strategies, which are basically trying to combo win the game as quickly as possible. And sort of narrowing your deck's focus down to that's what I'm attempting to do, is get to a particular combo, get enough mana to play that particular combo as quickly as possible, and then probably playing some number of counterspells, because if my opponents are also playing counterspells, they're going to try to stop me from winning, and I need to stop them from stopping me.
This idea of including counterspells in decks, even though we've talked about how that's actually like not efficient, I think it's hard to say if it's like a chicken or the egg thing. Like, did it happen because people started bringing counterspells in or not? I'm not exactly sure how it started, but I think if I were to guess, it's probably because the size of Commander decks and the efficiency of being able to tutor as effectively as you can in most cEDH decks in particular, means that you are able to grab whatever piece that you might need. And so if you are in a position like, let's say you are the beatdown, right, and you believe that you have the most resources and you have access to being able to try and win the game before other people can, then you might want to go and tutor for counterspells at that point. You feel confident you can win, so you might want to go and get interaction to make sure you can secure your win.
So in that dynamic, I think players are deciding that playing a counter, like having a counterspell in your deck, is worth it because it allows you to stop other players from stopping you, and then also you can, in a pinch, if you had to, be in the weaker position of using that counterspell to stop your opponent.
Right. It's the most versatile interaction spell.
Yeah. Right. And it's also instant speed, can interact exactly when you need to. Counterspells make a lot of sense in that way. So we did a video recently on the deck Semi-Blue, which is a Japanese strategy that effectively trades this interaction dynamic for what is, I guess, known as resilience, which basically means the ability to push through opposing interaction. And it does this with creature-based combos and uncounterable spells, namely Atali and Deadeye Navigator is one of the creature combos. The other one is Kiki Jiki and either Zealous Conscripts or Cloud of Fairies plus Manamo. So there's a few different ways that this deck can sort of like creature combo and win the game. And it also plays Last March of the Ents. Last March of the Ents is just uncounterable, says it on the card. And then with Last March of the Ents, so you're going to draw cards equal to the greatest toughness amongst creatures you control, and then you can put any number of creatures from your hand into play. And what it allows you to do is to put creatures into play with, one, not casting them, and two, without them being able to be countered, because Last March of the Ents can't be countered. So if you can build your strategy in a way where you don't need counterspells to do the best thing that counterspells are for, you're narrowing the number of interaction that your opponents can use to interact with that spell. And effectively meaning that you don't need counterspells to stop your opponents from stopping you, which is the best mode for counterspells in Commander. So if then you are playing counterspells, their only purpose would be to stop your opponents from winning, which means their purpose becomes the only one that is, I am playing them to not lose rather than playing them to win. Right. The other part of this dynamic is that you are relying upon your opponents to play counter magic, so that if there's a deck that could be winning faster than you that is interactable, you don't have any way to stop them. But if somebody else at the table does, you're sort of putting an externality on them. You're putting the burden on them to interact with that deck, which means that their counter magic will be more often in that worse position, which is them playing it to not lose rather than playing the counterspell to protect their own win. If given that position, the, I think, rational response is to then, if you're being put in that position where you are the defense for another player, we look at the strategy circle, rush, economy, defense. If they are relying on you to stop the rush strategy, because defense theoretically beats rush, if they have put you in that position and you are the one stopping rush, that means rush isn't beating them. So they can focus on economy, they being Semi-Blue in this instance, to push towards that inevitability to play the spell that you can't interact with, which means you're in an inherently losing position. So rationally, you might think, well, I'm going to play rush then, so I can go under Semi-Blue and just beat them before they get to win.
Now, this can sort of create a loop, because if you end up going rush, but that rush is counterable, then you might end up seeing this sort of cyclical meta, right, where enough people are playing Semi-Blue, so people play rush, assuming that rush can go under Semi-Blue, which might bring interaction back in. The reason that is not an efficient strategy, basically, right, and why it's not, why I'm skeptical of like a healthy meta existing in this way, is because there's not the possibility of sideboarding. And so what you have to do generally is you try and have to either have the most efficient deck, which is probably what you should do, or you have to have enough answers to things in a widespread form for your deck, which is why I think counterspells have been chosen as the ideal thing, is because it's just the most versatile point of interaction. But if people are getting around that interaction, right? And this is part of what Semi-Blue is doing, is it's not just uncounterable things, it's things that are commonly not countered by existing strong counterspells, which are creatures, or trigger effects off of creatures, right? That like cascade and stuff that can't be interacted with, at least as easily. What it ends up meaning is that, your counterspell then becomes less efficient inherently than if you were to just try and win the game.
Because it's not a universal answer anymore.
Right. And because you can't see and respond with a sideboard of cards, and then see, oh, well, they're playing that deck or they're playing that commander or whatever. So I'm going to swap in these cards, or, okay, I think maybe even based off seat position, I might need to be more reactive or something. So I should play more counterspells or something. Like, you don't have that opportunity. And so instead, it's probably in your best interest to just pursue whatever the fastest way of winning is.
Play to win, not play to not lose. Because again, the problem with playing your sideboard in your deck, which is effectively what you're trying to do to stop the table with either stacks or counterspells or whatever it is that you're diluting your ability to just win the game. And so in that way, you are much more inefficient than a deck that is built specifically to just win the game, right? There's often times where we will see, this dynamic exists in 1v1 Magic, where we'll see game 1, each player should be playing their most proactive game plan, and then game 2 and 3 is more reactive based on what your opponent is attempting to do. And you're sideboarding in your reactiveness, and that's also based on whether you're going first or second. That changes that dynamic about how proactive or reactive you want to be. So in our analysis of Commander systems, the reason why defense specifically, let's look at Strategy Circle real quick. Strategy Circle is rush, economy, and defense. Rush is, if we're looking at a pure rush strategy, what you're doing is playing nothing that in your deck that slows you from winning the game. This is effectively sly. Economy is, I'm investing to win the game later. I'm building up resources, and theoretically, if the game goes longer, I will be in a better position. Defense is, I am stopping my opponent. Whatever my opponent is doing, I am investing some amount of resource to defend myself from my opponent when they are attempting to win the game. So when we look at sort of the rock, paper, scissors that's created by these sort of like most zoomed out view of how you can spend your resources, we can see that if you defense in this position is inherently at a disadvantage. And that is because you are attempting to defend against multiple opponents. And so when we have sort of like a Tragedy of the Commons scenario, where everybody is acting together to manage the commons, right, which is everybody being responsible and playing counterspells and sort of policing the table equally, that creates an environment in which being as proactive as possible is maybe not as much of a winning strategy. But when we start to creep into territory where players are abusing the commons, are not falling in line with, well, I'm supposed to play a certain amount of interaction to help police the table. Instead, I'm going to rely on my opponents to do that. You now have put any player that is in that defensive position at even more of a disadvantage. So when we look at semi-blue, the force that semi-blue is now putting on the format, and this is one of the reasons why it's such an interesting topic and thing to explore, is that when semi-blue comes in and is utilizing their opponents, again, as one of their best resources and saying, you're responsible for stopping the turbo deck, and if you don't, turbo's going to win. But if you do, I'm going to win. You're putting defense in the worst possible position. And so rational actors, I think I already kind of covered this, but rational actors will move to a different point on the strategy circle. Either they're going to join semi-blue and think, oh yeah, this is great, let's all play big uncounterable stuff, or you're going to try to figure out where the next, you're going to try to beat the meta, predict where the meta is going to be, and move to the more proactive position and think, well, if less people are playing counterspells, I'm going to play rush and I'm going to beat semi-blue before it can have its inevitability. Then nobody's playing counterspells. And in order for us to rotate that strategy circle again, this is where things get really tricky. And one of the reasons why in our semi-blue video, we were sort of like concerned, I guess, or thinking about like, well, what ultimately happens here? Because if only one player at the table has decided that defense is supposed to be what the thing is to do, they are trying to defend against 3 other players that are attempting to win the game immediately. And that's like a much taller order than if you can have 3v1 dynamics where 3 of you can team up against the one person trying to win.
So I guess thinking about this, where do we see the future of this potentially, right? And I think that when we covered the deck semi-blue, a lot of responses that we got from people were LOL Stax back in the meta, right? And I think that like personally, Stax from a systemic level is not inherently bad. the idea of playing not to lose technically is not bad if strong enough. Right.
And in 1v1, we can look at the deck. The deck was very successful.
Right. And that was because it matched the level of what was necessary, right, to compete with Sly at the time. Right. But here it does it in a very similar way to Rush, right, is that like the sort of turbo combo strategy is our new Rush strategy. But the traditional way of Rush is not fast enough. There's nothing that's going to beat just a flat out combo that wins the game. And so Stax, I think, is in the similar position where you are trying to play as many Stax pieces as possible, as quickly as possible, but you can't account for all of the variety of decks that you might encounter. And so as you are playing one card, right, that maybe it's Graveyard Denial or Hate or something, right? Not that that's seen a whole lot, but whatever. Then it might take out two of the players, but maybe one of the players that doesn't affect. And you essentially ended up spending mana to prevent two of the players, but there's still one person that's not affected and they can use their resources still. And it has to come back around to you. And that whole time, you're not getting closer to winning. You're just slowing their process down, right? And hopefully to an inevitable lockout.
Right. And that's the biggest issue, right? Is that you're basically trying to 3v1 your opponents, right? You're saying, well, I'm going to play like strong enough defensive, globally defensive spells that will stop my opponents from winning. But that doesn't mean you're winning. It means they're not winning. And theoretically, some of them are not winning. Right?
It's technically still not bad because I think viewing it from the 3v1 approach makes sense, but it's only if it can go over the top fast enough.
Right.
And that's just what we're seeing is it's very difficult.
If you legitimately could 3v1 your opponents. Right. Yeah. And so, you know, when we've seen Stax strategies that have been successful in the past, these are usually proactive Stax strategies where you're playing stuff that's slowing down your opponents enough that you can be proactive and win the game. This was Winota, and Winota is not a particularly good deck anymore, right? So, like, it for a moment was decent, you know, it put up some results, but like it's not particularly good. And I think part of that is when you are to go back to the sideboarding and the sort of examples we're using previously, is that because there's no sideboards involved and you're playing best of one, you have to play your sideboard in your deck, which means that whatever you are, you're basically being sort of like prescriptive of the format. You're saying, this is what I think the format is going to be, and if you miss that called shot, then you have dead cards in your deck. You have cards that literally are doing nothing. Right.
And you end up seeing this, right, where it's very easy to pinpoint a card and be like, well, that card is not useful because of this, right? It's only a very specific piece. You need as much versatility as possible, right? And the idea of getting most of that versatility usually ends up just falling back into something like counterspells as opposed to anything else, because that's just an easy response to the most things that you might encounter.
Right. And again, this dynamic is emerging because there's an archetype where counterspells don't work. So what are we left with?
Right. And I do think that like this is a pretty big missed opportunity in the cEDH space, I guess. I don't know what tournaments have been organized. It's possible that people have tried sideboarding in the past. I don't know what the process is. The problem is the games go so long you can't do a 2 out of 3 game. But there is information still on the board, right? You can look at someone's commander and therefore then make a sideboard decision based off of that. And I think that that's probably potentially fine.
I think that that could be really interesting, right? That adds an immense skill component to cEDH, where when you sit down to the table, now it would make games longer because you're sideboarding before you play, but you can see the commanders. That gives you some amount of information to sideboard with, and that would take a lot of this pressure off of, I have to call the shot perfectly for what Stax pieces I should have in my deck. I can instead have some number of those in my sideboard, and I can move them in based on my opponents at the table.
You know what's going to happen, though?
But then what?
People are going to be like, what are you sideboarding in?
Oh,
and they're going to like politic the
politicking
sideboard
before the game.
They're going to be like, look, they're playing a Tolly, so you better do this and that. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, no, I think it has
it has to be hidden, I think.
Not only hidden, but like, I mean, look, we're just circling back around to politics subverting the systems of Magic in this instance, which that's a whole nother conversation.
I think the other issue is that there's just too many, right now, at least, the commander pile is like majority partners, right? And it's like, okay, well, are you Rog Thras Turbo or are you Rog Thras Semi-Blue? And it's like, I guess you flip a coin and decide, or you just look at meta results or something. But
I don't know which one I am. You're
right.
gonna have to find out.
You write down your deck name as Semi-Blue, but you're actually Turbo, and like that's how you.
Yeah, there's a whole subterfuge meta.
Yeah,
there's a whole game of chicken where you're like, oh, did he write it down thinking I would know what it is, or
No.
did he write it down trying to trick me into thinking it wasn't that? Or
and then it's actually just 99 counterspells, and that's all the
Nailed
deck is.
yeah. All right, so I think we end up in a position where like I don't know, and this is something that we were sort of speculating on before, and to reiterate here, we're not saying that this is the way things are, and this is us spotting exactly how things are working, and this is exactly what it is, and this is what it's going to forever be, and this is exactly how it's going to turn out. It's us looking at the system's forces that are being put upon players when they are deciding what strategies to play.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that like their mechanics can override this. I think in the Semi-Blue video, I maybe brought up Yu-Gi-Oh! As a good example of a game that's done this. But I think a good example of a Magic card that has done this are like the Pacts. The like Pact of Negation. The Pact cards are cards that have subverted the overall system, right? It is essentially saying, hey, you're used to the fact that you can predict if someone can cast a spell based off of untapped mana. Well, this card goes around that. It goes above what you are expecting based off of the systems and the expectations set on players, and it's more powerful than that in a sense. And like Wizards can do this, and they can do this with commander cards in particular. There's lots of different knobs that you can do to manipulate this and have a card essentially be more powerful than it normally would in a 1v1 like this, right? And we've seen how this dynamic shifts a card like Rhystic Study, where Rhystic Study is not very playable in 1v1, but is one of the best cards, if not the best card, in multiplayer.
Yeah. And like, it's interesting, right? Because this is almost a case to like not ban Rhystic Study. Which is funny, right? Because like if you're the person who's playing defense, does Rhystic Study give you enough card advantage that you can draw into enough answers and makes it worth diluting your strategy enough so that you can literally draw all of the counterspells in your deck to stop 3 opponents that are all playing turbo? Maybe? Doesn't seem like a winning proposition to me.
Why play Rhystic Study when you could just win the game?
Good point. Good point.
Just win the game.
Just win the game.
Duh.
Just win the game.
Yeah. Why aren't you guys just winning the game?
Just jam. Just make them have it.
I mean, if you're seat 4, you're fucked, but
just jam.
Just
you're seat 4, just jam.
Yeah.
You
just
got
keep
it?
Going.
Do it.
Yeah. If you enjoyed listening to us talking about playing to win as opposed to playing to not lose, feel free to give us a little like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below.
Also, if you like winning, you can join our Discord. Links in the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed listening to us talking... If you enjoyed listening to us talking... Fuck.
Whew.
If you enjoyed listening to us talking... Why can't I say this? If you enjoyed listening to us talk about... Fuck.
You had it.
I know.